Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I'm Tyler Donahue, and we are ready to punctuate this first week of February with another episode. We're going to go diving into the recruiting realm this time regarding the Nittany Lions' latest junior day that they hosted on campus. Official visits are starting to be scheduled for the upcoming spring window with the class of 2026. We've got the final edition of Top 24/7 rankings for the 2025 class to dissect, including a new 5-star from this Penn State class, and a lot more. We'll get into that with Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider, in just a moment. I wanted to bring your attention to our last episode of the Lions247 Podcast. In case you missed that, it went live on Tuesday afternoon. We were fresh out of a press conference with new Penn State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. Heard from him for about a half hour. We worked through some of our top takeaways from that press conference, also discussed some defensive players that he'll be coaching who entered this offseason with some momentum. So head back to that episode that dropped Tuesday. Listen for the latest there. But as I said, we're switching into recruiting for this particular show. We're going to do that with Tyler Calvaruso right now. Welcome back, Tyler.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm happy to be back. This past weekend, it was a good one for Penn State. Didn't net a commitment like the first junior day, but still plenty to discuss coming out of that. And it's a dead period. I always say it's a dead period, but it's far from dead on our end. That's for sure.
That's for sure. And if you've been following our coverage at Lions247.com, hopefully that's been apparent. Dozens of VIP articles here in the last couple of weeks relating to these junior day visits, relating to the momentum that is building for the 2026 class, those players who are finishing up their junior years of high school in the next few months, approaching their summer before their senior season. Such a big time for an opportunity for Penn State to start building a class that right now ranks inside the top 5 nationally in 24/7 sports rankings. Before we get to some of that feedback from the junior day, and we'll talk about some of those incoming freshmen and where they stand in the latest and final 24/7 sports rankings for the 2025 class, I wanted to go through a couple lists that have been dropped from notable Penn State targets. We are getting to the point now where, as you said, guys are second half of their junior years. It's a time when you start to get very serious. If you're a guy with 30 offers, maybe you try to focus on 5 or 6 schools. And so a couple lists that dropped for long-term Penn State targets. We're going to begin at the wide receiver spot because that's always a hot topic in Penn State roster building. Tavon Branch is a top 24/7 wide receiver out of Virginia, one of the premier playmakers at this position in the region. He's got his list down to 5 schools. He's got official visits planned out, and Penn State is a major factor moving forward.
Yeah, and Brown has had that long-standing relationship with Marcus Hagans. Those two guys are really close. Led to Brown locking in that official visit for the June 13th or the 15th weekend. Things are starting to come together, man. It's I feel like the more recent cycles, it's been a more accelerated timeline for a lot of recruits in terms of locking in official visits. And it's even more accelerated now this year, I feel, now that coaches were able to go in-home with prospects throughout the winter contact period. That wasn't something that was in the cards before this year. That was reserved for after the senior season. We would always see those visits pop up after the players had concluded their senior year. But now you're having the ability to go in home beforehand, and that accelerates the timeline for visits getting locked in. It allows for more in-depth conversations that lead to visits getting locked in. You're seeing that with a guy like Brown making an early cut to his list, locking in that Penn State official visit. There's a lot of competition here, as there is with really every recruit Penn State is after at this juncture. We're in early February, so a lot of these guys, even though they're narrowing down, competition is still really stiff. When it comes to Brown, quite frankly, I think Penn State has a little bit of work to do coming into the official visit. The goal is to get him back on campus during the spring as well. He didn't visit for either of Penn State's 2 junior days. He got an offer from Georgia that really caught his attention. I think that's one to keep an eye on moving forward. There have been a lot of programs doing well with Brown. Penn State has as well, but he hasn't been around in a little bit, and you got to build up a little bit of that momentum. Got to get a little bit of it back, rather, I should say. Hopefully get him to campus during the spring, and you make a strong impression headed into the official visit. I think that could pay dividends for Penn State's pursuit of Brown, but getting the visit locked in the first place was important because things are really ratcheting up with Brown, who's a really good receiver. He's part of that Virginia group that we talk about a lot. There's a lot of talent in that state. Penn State's after, and Brown's one of its top guys, especially at wide receiver.
Brown, 6'3". You love the length there. He's pushing 190 pounds right now at this stage. He's not too lanky. I think you really do like where he is physically. Top 200 overall player. He's number 140 in our rankings at 24/7 Sports. He's the number 19 wide receiver and number 6 player from that state of Virginia, which is where Marcus Higgins did a lot of recruiting on behalf of the Virginia Cavaliers in his previous stop. And obviously, we know that in the last cycle, the receiver that I think you and I are most high on from that 2025 class is Matt Outen, who's out of Virginia as well. Let's shift over to in-state prospect that you and I have gotten a lot of looks at on the camp circuit in recent years. And he's starting to move towards a really important part of his process. It makes me feel old because I feel like we just started learning about him, but time moves fast in college football recruiting. And Alex Hasell out of St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia, he's been on Penn State's radar really going back before his sophomore year of high school. A premier player for one of the premier powerhouse programs in the country. It's a place that you just got a commitment from last cycle. You signed a guy from there, Cam Brown. It had been not Cam Brown. It's Cam Smith you got out of St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. And it had been a long time, I think, going back to the 2015 class with John Reed since they had last brought in a blue chip player from St. Joe's Prep. By the way, Jim Knowles, St. Joe's Prep guy himself. How important is this recruitment, not just for Penn State being able to add a talented, versatile defensive line piece in Alex Hasell, but stacking classes, stacking commitments from that St. Joe's program, which is always producing power conference talent?
Well, it's the dominant program in Philly. There are a lot of good programs in Philly, but I think everyone knows St. Joe's is the standard at this point. Just look at the hardware they bring home on a yearly basis. LaSalle's working its way up there as well, but St. Joe's Prep is the standard, and they have the best players more often than not. Again, talent is scattered throughout Pennsylvania. It's scattered throughout Philly. Prep's consistently loaded, and Hasell is one of its top 2026 guys. So it's important on that front because you'd be plucking a player from one of the best programs in the state. And we all know the saying, Penn State wants to keep the best in Pennsylvania. Hasell falls in to that category. I don't want anyone to look at his ranking on 24/7 or really anywhere else because I think he's underrated. I truly do. And I've seen him in person a bunch. You've seen him in person a bunch. I had the pleasure to see him in game action with the pads on, and he's a beast. He moves guys around. He is really, really well put together physically. I feel like we're always learning a little bit about him just because he's not really that big on the whole recruiting thing. Kind of keeps to himself, doesn't take a whole lot of visits. I mean, he only took one visit during the winter contact period, and that was to Duke. Didn't take any game visits during the fall, was really locked in on his football schedule at St. Joe's Prep, had some family stuff going on as well. But looking to get back during the spring now that his list is cut down to 4. Penn State, Duke, Syracuse, Michigan. Of those 4, it's really tight right now. I think Penn State, Michigan, and Duke, in no order, are really fighting it out. I've talked to Hasell a bunch about Duke, and Manny Diaz did a good job with him while he was at Penn State. Gabe Infante did a good job with him while he was at Penn State. So now that those two are at Duke, and of course Gabe Infante having his St. Joe's Prep ties on his own right, that has helped Duke a lot. I think the Blue Devils are a real player. And Hasell didn't hold back when discussing Michigan with me. He said, that's a program, if they get involved. They hadn't gotten involved at that point when we talked about Michigan. Now they're very much in the mix. And, I think getting out to Ann Arbor during the spring would give him a lot to think about, but he's going to be more likely than not going to be back at Penn State during the spring. And he doesn't have any official visits locked in right now. That's something you figure will change sooner rather than later. He's going to be really, really selective in who he goes about visiting. We see it with the top 4 being trimmed down to that already. So Hasell, he's an important target on a bunch of different fronts. He's one of those priorities for Deion Barnes, no doubt about it. And, he can play. He can give you reps on the edge and, obvious passing downs. He can slide inside, play that interior role. Really strong kid. I think the interior is where he's going to be at the next level. I think that's what Penn State is thinking as well. So there's a lot to like about Hasell as a player. And as a target, he carries, I'd say, a great deal of importance.
I think he's a guy that you can bring to campus and say he'll play both for us. I really do think that with his frame, he's not 6'6", but he's 6'3" at least, and he's got real length. I don't know what his wingspan measurements are off the top of my head, but he's got that kind of a wingspan. He's got that kind of length. He uses it, and he's tenacious. I think that's what really has stood out to him from some game evaluation, but what we also saw in camps where you get toward the end of these afternoons, it's hot, you've been pushing around guys lose steam, guys lose their edge. He sustained it. And that was going back a couple summers ago when he was really a young pup. And when you are making an impact in the trenches at a school like St. Joe's Prep, who plays at a national caliber kind of schedule, and you're doing that as a freshman and a sophomore, you have my attention. And he's built on that. And really curious to see where this recruitment goes. You mentioned that combination of Manny Diaz and Gabe Infante were able to pick up a commitment from Cam Smith, but they were not able to get that signature at the end of the day. So it's interesting to see now that there's been a few instances of some battles here between James Franklin and Manny Diaz since they split ways. Of course, that hasn't always gone in favor of the Nittany Lions. Bradley Gomper is one of the top linebackers in the state of Pennsylvania. He'll be wearing a Duke Blue Devils uniform in 2025. Let's get into that official visit conversation a little bit because, as we said, those are really starting to pop up now. We're getting confirmations. We have a lot of stuff, content related over at 247 Sports this week. And one of the top offensive linemen in the 2026 class you were able to catch up with, Gregory Patrick. Tell us a story there.
Yeah, he's going to be taking his official visit. He's going to actually, Penn State's going to be his first trip of his official visit. So he's going to be on campus May 30th through June 1st. He's going on to check out Michigan State, Michigan, Notre Dame after that. Frankly, I think it's probably going to be a task, I think, to pull him out of the Midwest. But Penn State has done really well with Patrick. Phil Trotwood specifically has done really well with Greg Patrick. Penn State's offensive line developmental plans, its recent history, its pedigree in that regard has really resonated with Patrick. He told me it's pretty much the driving force behind why he wants to take the official visit. And he's also intrigued by what Penn State has to offer from an off-the-field perspective as well. So, again, he has some strong options in the Midwest. Michigan State's been on him a really long time. Michigan's heavily involved. Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame might have been the first official. I might be mistaken. It was either Michigan or Notre Dame that locked in the first official visit with Patrick. And Notre Dame has been all over him. They've had some success recruiting offensive linemen in the Midwest. Could Patrick be next there? I think it's too early to make that determination because I think he's going to go through all of his 4 official visits that he has locked in right now. Penn State's getting the first crack. I don't know, and this is something I always go back and forth on. Me and you have discussed it as well. Given the current recruiting calendar and the landscape and where we're at with things right now, I'm not sure that getting that first visit is necessarily the most important thing anymore. I think it used to be. You make that strong, overwhelming impression, you lock it down before a guy gets the chance to go anywhere else. I still think that carries value, but I pick up on more and more guys wanting to get through their official visit slate before making a final decision. I think that's where we're at more so now. Obviously, there are going to be some outliers where you see guys, they want to make all of their visits and then others want to wrap things up early. I think Patrick falls more into the former where he's going to take all of his visits. But again, Penn State's going to have its chance to make that strong first impression that could really carry it throughout official visit season.
As we see the NCAA rules impacting roster structure and the amount of guys you can bring into a roster, I think there'll be more willingness to take commitments in this cycle as well. So you could see guys go off the board earlier than normal. Patrick, by the way, top 20 tackle prospect in the 2026 cycle. He's the number 2 player in the state of Michigan, as Tyler alluded to. Both of the top teams in his home state are chasing him out of the Big Ten, along with Penn State. Sticking in the Midwest and Big Ten territory, let's go out to Dunlap High School in Illinois, which is where you'll find a top 100 prospect and a top 10 tight end recruit in Mac Sutter. We know Penn State, they can scatter far and wide when it comes to where they want to hunt at the tight end spot. They got a bunch of guys in the NFL. They got the All-American Mackey Award winner leaving campus now, and they've got a bevy of blue chips in that room trying to be the next man up. So Ty Howell, again, he often is going to be very selective, same as James Franklin, as they try to pare down their tight end priorities. Where does Sutter fit in, and what could this official visit do for the process?
I'm glad you brought that up because I actually think Penn State's in a position to be even more selective this cycle than maybe any other cycle that I've gotten the chance to cover here with the Nittany Lions, because you take 3 tight ends in the 25 class, more often than not, you're not going to follow that up with another loaded tight end class in terms of numbers. Every tight end that Penn State is in on right now, really good players if you look at the board. Guys like Sutter, J.C. Anderson, Ian Primer from Kansas. But all those guys are from the Midwest. It's not necessarily a strong tight end class in the Northeast this year. So Ty Howell's kind of been all over the place. He's been all over the place with James Franklin as well, because Franklin joined Howell to visit with Sutter during the winter contact period. So you could see where he stands on the board from a prioritization standpoint. And again, this visit getting locked in early, I think, is notable because there aren't a ton of tight end names on that board right now when it comes to the top part of the pecking order. It's Sutter, it's Anderson, Kendrick Harrison, who's committed to Oregon. That's another guy Penn State's going to stay on. But Penn State is far from inclined to reach at the position this cycle. It could be a cycle where you don't see an addition maybe until later on in the game, depending on who pops up late. But Sutter getting this visit locked in, it shows his level of interest in Penn State coming out of the winter contact period, where the staff spent a lot of time with him, his family during its trip out to the Midwest. And he's a really good player, athletic kid, has that basketball background, the athleticism that Hasell and the Penn State staff like out of its tight ends. So he's going to be on campus June 6th through the 8th. That's where he's currently slated to visit. And it is going to be, I think, telling for Penn State where things go at tight end. Because now that you have one locked in, sometimes you're starting to see with the offensive line as well, a lot of early official visits locked in there. Once one guy at a position locks in an official, you start to see a little bit of a trend with other guys locking in officials. So Sutter could just be the start of tight ends locking in those OVs with Penn State.
Still about 7 months away from his senior football season at the high school level. 6'5", 225 pounds. You talked about the basketball athleticism that translates on the football field. A lot to like about him. That's why he is a top 100 recruit. He'll be making his trip. And then let's finish here in terms of scheduled official visits with an in-state prospect at a Riverside High School in Taylor, Pennsylvania. Tavon Branch is a guy that I think we agree we liked when we saw him on the camp circuit. Other coaching staffs have certainly felt that way. He carries several power conference offers. Where is he in his process? Because he doesn't have a rating or a ranking, composite or from us, which doesn't really marry with the fact that he's got these offers. It's a little bit of a murky recruitment, I think, from the outside looking in for a lot of folks. So Tavon Branch, in-state recruit. Is Penn State in the driver's seat? Do they want to be in the driver's seat? Where are we with the process of evaluation on both ends of this?
Before I dive into that, I actually just want to clarify something real quick because I misspoke earlier. Tavon Brown's not visiting June 13th or the 15th. He's going to be on campus the same weekend as Sutter. His visit is June 6th through the 8th. So now that's
folks, mark your calendars accordingly. Exactly. Sorry, thank you for noting that change.
No, clearly I need to mark mine accordingly as well because I don't know what's going on. But but when it comes to Tavon Branch, his recruitment, I think it's taken a little bit of an interesting turn here because you're starting to see more programs come after him as a defensive lineman. And Oklahoma has been one of those programs that's really the driving force of that. Oklahoma is all over Branch as a defensive lineman. He's a really good two-way player. And Oklahoma's even talking about playing potentially both ways. As Branch put it with me, he could be the Travis Hunter of the trenches. So that's the pitch going around these days.
Quite a sales pitch, by the way, Tyler. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we got our look at Branch last June working under Phil Troutwine supervision.
Yes, and that's where Penn State likes him. That's been an offensive line pursuit. It kind of reminds me of Liam Andrews, though, because where is he going to decide he wants to play at the next level? There was a long time where Liam Andrews was an offensive line recruiter, and then he decided, hey, I want to play on the defensive line. And he still wound up at Penn State in the end because they loved what he could do on the defensive line. I don't know where Branch is going to take things. I'm also far less certain on where exactly things stand between him and Penn State as I was during the fall and even parts of the winter, because there was a point where I kind of got the feeling it might not drag out too much longer. He might join Penn State's class during the fall. He visited 3 times during the fall. He was on campus for the home opener against Bowling Green, and then he visited in consecutive weekends in November. He was around for the Ohio State game, made it back the following weekend for the whiteout against Washington. And when you see stuff like that, those guys, they tend to go off the board sometimes. Didn't happen with Branch. Now I do have some more questions. Rutgers is right there in the mix. Oklahoma, as I mentioned, is right there in the mix. Michigan's starting to get involved a little bit. Branch mentioned to me that if the opportunity presented itself, he would potentially add an OV with the Wolverines. Now, that would probably come down to Michigan in deciding whether or not it wants to offer. But there's more, I don't want to say more competition because Oklahoma and Rutgers have been involved for a while, but it's not as much of a slam dunk as I once thought it was. And there are also questions about, depending on who you talk to, where exactly Branch is on a really deep offensive line board. We mentioned Hasell having the opportunity to be selective. I think Trout's in that same spot at this point, given his reputation and what he does on the development front. So a lot of moving parts here in this recruitment in early February, but Branch's official visit schedule as it stands right now, going to Rutgers that first weekend, May 30th through June 1st. Going to follow that up with a trip to Oklahoma, June 6th through the 8th. Then it's Penn State, June 13th through the 15th. So I anticipate now this is a recruitment that will go through OVs. And I don't think he's going to make a decision before that. It might not, from a numbers perspective, I don't know how that's going to go on Penn State's side. You mentioned, the bump to 105, that gives you some more wiggle room, but still, you don't want to overextend. So we'll see where things fall from a numbers standpoint and where Branch wants to take his recruitment in general. Because again, I think the position conversation, it's an important one now.
Yeah, and along that, same timeline where you're talking about all these visits taking place, we will be keeping tabs on where he's camping, and not just where he's camping in terms of the city, but is he camping as an offensive lineman? Is he camping as a defensive lineman? Does that vary based on where he's camping? If he's at a Nike camp or some generic camp, where does he go? If he goes to a campus camp like here at Penn State, is he working under the direction of Phil Trautwein or Deion Barnes? And does that vary campus to campus? A lot to figure out with this one, but a player here in Pennsylvania, certainly to keep tabs on. Another visit lined up for him to Happy Valley. Before we move forward to some feedback from last weekend and the Junior Day event, I wanted to finish off because Zion Ellie, who is maybe the top recruit in the country, he's the number one edge rusher at 247 Sports. We saw him in camp last year. It looks like he could do just about anything you'd want on the defensive line moving forward, stand up and rush, play on the interior if you needed to down the line. He's a freak, and everyone is swarming around this kid. And it may surprise you after I lay that on the line. He's a Maryland commit. He is committed to the in-state Terps. It's a really big win for Mike Loxley as things stand. But we've seen in the past, my mind goes to Dwayne Haskins. That was supposed to be a build the program moment for Maryland when he committed. He ended up signing with Ohio State, and the rest is history. So we'll see if they get to the finish line. Teams like Penn State are trying to ensure it doesn't. How do you feel? And I'm mentioning this because Brian Doan has a great update on this at 247 Sports on Thursday on Ellie and Penn State and others who are trying to get him off that Maryland commitment. Tyler, as things stand now here in early February, what do you think the likelihood is that Penn State remains a serious contender for Ellie all the way down the stretch, and additionally that they're able to get him on campus for an official visit?
I think there's a good chance they do get him on campus for an official based on the way things are going in his recruitment right now. And by the way, if you're a subscriber, which you should be if you're listening to this, but check out Dawn's story on Zion Ellie because it is about as in-depth you could get into a kid's recruitment in early February as you could possibly get. So check that out. There's a lot of good insight into everyone's involvement with Ellie. But I do think Penn State, they were doing a good job with him before his surprise commitment. When he popped for Maryland, it caught a lot of people off guard. And it didn't mark the end of his recruitment either. Programs didn't back off. Penn State paid that visit to him during the winter contact period. James Franklin and Anthony Poindexter dropped by St. Francis Academy in Baltimore to check in with him. And I do think that more likely than not, that visit will come to fruition. At least that's what Penn State is hoping for. We've had guys in the past who were highly ranked like that. There was a point where it looked like Jeremiah Smith was going to make it to Penn State for an official visit. So you always got to see if these visits do indeed come together. Now, the difference here is Penn State's in a lot stronger with Ellie than it was with Jeremiah Smith. That relationship's a good one. Penn State offered early. Ellie, we haven't mentioned Deion Barnes in this equation yet, built up a really good relationship with him. He's mentioned a potential fit in Penn State's system, but it's not going to be easy overall. Even if / when they do get him on campus for that official visit, you've got a lot of programs also pushing just as hard as Penn State. Some of them have really deep NIL pockets. Auburn is right in the mix, and Auburn has done well at St. Francis Academy. They're building up a little bit of a pipeline there. So that's something to monitor. This Ohio State, this is a who's who of college football when it comes to the programs Ellie is considering on top of his commitment to Maryland. I don't know if that's going to stick. We'll see. It's going to be an eventful one for him. That's for sure. It already is a very eventful recruitment. It's been fun to follow, but Penn State right now in early February, I think you have to like where you are with Zion Ellie in the sense that you're in the running to get one of his official visits when that time comes. He's still hearing you out and has a desire to make it to campus for an official. I think that's a plus at this point.
Yeah, Maryland finished its 2024 season at 4-8 with a 5-game losing streak to close things out. That was capped off by a 44-7 loss in Beaver Stadium, but they do have Ellie on board for now. We'll see how long that lasts. Penn State will be doing its damnedest to make sure it doesn't stick. When we look at the Junior Day feedback, we're going to go back to another wide receiver who has played ball in Virginia, although I know that he has since transferred. He's at the Bullis School in Maryland, which is one of the premier programs down there in the DMV. And he had formerly been at Woodbridge High School, and he's been on the radar for a long time with us. Connor Solomon, number 145 in overall rankings, number 20 in the receiver rankings for the 2026 class. 6'1", 190. You like the size. You love the skills. How does Penn State fit into his equation after his junior day visit?
Well, from an on-field fit perspective, I'll tell you this. Penn State needs playmakers, and Connor Solomon is exactly that. I mean, 10-4 in the 100-meter dash, 40-time, really, really impressed the Penn State staff during the summer. So there's no doubt he's at the top. He is a top-of-the-board target, and his visit went really well. I think it went about as well as it could have gone for Penn State. Now, we're also discussing a recruitment where I don't believe there's any clear leader right now. I think Clemson, Notre Dame, and Penn State have all done a lot of really good things with Connor Solomon, and I don't think either of those three programs has really been able to take a step forward or differentiate itself just yet. Now, the other interesting element with this is his spring is going to be very busy when it comes to track. That's going to impact his ability to make visits. Now, you're going to see Penn State, Notre Dame, Clemson, all these other programs push for visits. I think Salomon's going to be really selective in where he visits. And last year, he dealt with a similarly busy track schedule. It's a lot different at the Bullish School. They're very competitive nationally, and it's just a completely different ballgame for him when it comes to track compared to when it was in Virginia. So he was able to squeeze some visits in last spring. Penn State got one of them. He made sure to make that one work. I think he's going to do that again. I think he's going to do it again with Clemson, and I think he's going to do it with Notre Dame as well. I think for the first time, we are starting to see a top group. Now, there might not be much separation in that group, as I said, but a top group is still a top group. Even if he hasn't formally announced it, those are the three standing out right now. And I think he's going to prioritize getting back to those places. And maybe if his schedule opens up, maybe he checks out some programs that he hasn't been able to see. And how does that impact the way official visits get scheduled? So there are a lot of different storylines to monitor with this Connor Solomon recruitment, but Penn State has done well. I think they've been doing well since they offered. Marcus Hagan's has done a good job with Solomon. James Franklin has done a really good job with Solomon as well. Again, you're not just recruiting the player, you're recruiting the family. I think Franklin and the staff have done a really good job on that front.
And Penn State, by the way, number 4 class in that 2026 cycle. They've got a lot of ground to cover. It's a small class still, but they've had some headliners thus far. And so we'll see if they can keep stacking up the blue chip talent. Marlin Brigh, from your neck of the woods, although you have, I don't know if people know this, you are now living in Pennsylvania and you have been for several months, but I know the Garden State is near and dear to your heart as it is to mine. And Marlin Brigh is one of the premier players from that state in the 2026 cycle. He's out of DePaul Catholic in Wayne, New Jersey. Top 30 offensive tackle recruit, 6'6", 260. Where have we seen these kind of measurements before with Phil Trautwein evaluating the tackle position? Certainly deja vu there. What is Marlin Brigh's forecast in terms of Penn State's offensive line board coming off of his trip to campus?
I think Penn State's the program to beat right now with Marlin Brigh, and that's probably the first recruit we've discussed here today that, really make an outward statement like that. I think Penn State's setting the tone in Marlin Brigh's recruitment. There are a couple different reasons for that. Again, Phil Trautwein, he just went into DePaul and got Michael Trautman last cycle. So there's plenty of familiarity there. They've had a long-standing relationship, a good long-standing relationship at that. It's also, I mentioned Trautman for a reason. Those two are very close. When Bright was on campus, it was a multi-day visit as well. He got into town on Friday night for that Penn State wrestling match against Iowa, and he spent it with Michael Trautman. And then throughout Saturday, those two were able to spend more time together. And when he gets back in the spring, I think that's something that's going to continue as much as it can, because now obviously Trautman's going to be taking that on-field role as an early enrollee. He's going to be out there during spring practice. But Penn State's going to make sure that those two spend as much time together as possible, because Trautman's, by all accounts, has been enjoying his time on campus really thoroughly. Really likes the Penn State staff, loves the direction of the program, the way things are, and that is rubbing off on Marlin Brigh. I also want to mention Bright's a really smart kid. He's big on academics. So
he's a bright kid.
There you go. Yeah. Man, I missed an opportunity there. Good one. I'm glad you took advantage of it. But I think that could impact his recruitment. Penn State doing well on the academic side of the pitch as well. But if he takes things into the spring, maybe he gets out and sees some more, predominantly academic programs. We'll see. But I wasn't sure if he was going to make it beyond his junior day visit, to be honest. I think internally Penn State expected it to carry on a little bit longer, but you never know. We saw it with Julian Peterson during the first junior day visit. They get back around the staff that they've visited with quite often. You never know what's going to happen. A guy could decide to wrap things up in that moment. Bright did not fall into that category. He's going to take things into the spring. I think going into the spring, but everything we've heard, the conversations we've had, Penn State's doing really, really well there.
Yeah, and for Phil Troutwine, as we'll get to in just a moment, business is booming right now. And like you said, you can afford to be selective with what he has in that room, what he has been able to develop in that room, and then how it's shown up in the NFL draft lately. One more name to get to that we wanted to mention from Junior Day, and there's a ton more names that we have content on at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers. But a top 100 edge rusher from IMG Academy, you have my attention.
Yeah, Jay Cruel very much has my attention as well. I wasn't sure where things were going to be coming out of the visit. I believe it was his first trip to Penn State. I followed up with him on that. Didn't hear back quite yet, so hopefully I'll have something on the board soon. But it was his first in-depth look at Penn State, I can tell you that. And it went over really, really well. I think the key with Cruel moving forward is you got to get him back in the spring, and you got to lock in an official visit if you really, really want to have a chance with him, because his recruitment is jam-packed. He's pushing, I believe it's either 45 or 50 offers that he's pushing. He has pretty much every single elite program in college football after him. He is, for my money, I watched his film leading up to his visit. He's probably one of the top 6 or 7 edge rushers in this class. I'm not quite sure where we have him ranked off the top of my head. I would have to go look, but
number 6.
There you go.
You're good enough to work for 24/7 Sports, man.
I know. I might have to put in an application, but man, he's really good. And Penn State pushed really hard to get him to campus. Deion Barnes made it down to IMG during the winter contact period. And he talked to a couple different guys there, talked to Cruel, talked to Carmelo McKenzie, who's a Pennsylvania native, made it up with Cruel during that junior day weekend. And Cruel was telling me that really coming out of that visit, he learned some things about Penn State that really opened his eyes, things he hadn't previously known. He had some questions about his fit in the defense. They were answered, helped move Penn State up the list. Had some, hadn't seen the facilities, hadn't seen campus, checked boxes in that regard. Penn State moved up the list as a result. So he's going to cut down soon. At this point, I'm expecting Penn State to make that cut without much of a sweat, which I think is good news because you're clearly trending in the right direction here if you're Penn State. But you want to keep that going in the spring. You want to keep that going to official visit season. Now, it's not always easy for these IMG Academy guys to get out and make visits, especially because they have spring ball down in Florida. They have their own stuff going on. But if Cruel could fit one in, I think that'd be a massive development for Penn State because you've kind of planted the seed now. You've given Cruel something to think about. Penn State's entrenched as the legitimate contender now. I'm not sure it was before. I think it was a school of interest for Cruel, but now I think he's given them some real consideration.
All right, some names there to keep tabs on. We'll be doing that in the months ahead as the 2026 cycle really starts to pick up momentum. We'll be all over it at Lions247.com. A VIP subscription will keep you informed every step of the way. 30% off that VIP deal right now, by the way. Let's finish with some attention on our final edition of the top 24/7 rankings for the 2025 class. At this point, high school careers are done. Many of them are on campus. One of the guys you mentioned, Michael Troutman, he was practicing with this team during playoff preparations. He was one of several members of the 2025 class who were able to graduate high school early, come to campus. And in January, as the team's getting ready to play in the Orange Bowl, there are a bunch of them out there, and they stick out. They're skinny, they're small, but the potential is there. And so let's go through this list because there was a major riser from the group who ended up in 5-star territory. He is Penn State's lone 5-star recruit in 24/7 sports assessment for this class, and that's Malachi Goodman out of Paramus Catholic in New Jersey. Premier offensive lineman, played tackle there, jumped nearly 70 spots in this final edition, up from number 86 to number 19 overall. Big impact for our crew was getting a chance to evaluate him at the All-America Bowl down in San Antonio. And our scouting analyst, Gabe Brooks, among those who chimed in on him from San Antonio, said, quote, he combines jarring punch power, elite hand quickness, and functional strength with the agility to climb to the second level. We love Goodman for his power and upside as a versatile offensive lineman. There's a lot more. We have highlights of his high school senior film over at Lions247.com with more breakdowns from a couple analysts over at our national team. But what is your evaluation of Goodman? I think we've been eyeing him for a long time, but to see him finish out as a top 20 overall talent, one of the premier offensive linemen to enter this room since James Franklin came to Penn State. And what do you make of this for his future and maybe the immediate impact on the depth chart?
I wondered if he was going to actually get that 5th star after what he did down in San Antonio. All the reviews from his performance were just beyond glowing. But he was, what was he? He was like 84, I believe, at that point in our national rankings. So it was a sizable jump. Mm-hmm. It was a really big jump. I thought he might, miss out just a little bit, might check in around like 35 or something like that. But he gets that 5th star, and he doesn't just get it. He's well in that 5-star range. And people at Penn State, it didn't take that for them to acknowledge what Goodman is as a player. They've always felt he was a 5-star kind of talent. Strong kid, athletic kid. He moves really well, and not just from an athleticism standpoint. His footwork, I think, has improved gradually throughout his high school career, and he's going to keep getting better. He's going to be a summer enrollee. So I think, his first year on campus might be a little bit slower in that regard, just because, he's going to have to get up to speed, get in the weight room with Chuck Losey. All those offensive linemen, they go through a pretty impressive body transformation working with Losey. Shed some of that high school baby fat, traded him for muscle. Goodman's already a really strong kid, so you could kind of start to think about the possibilities there. We're talking about his punch power already as a high school kid. Now he's going into a college strength and conditioning program. He's only going to get better in that regard. And moving kids around, that's what Malachi Goodman does well. He offers you positional versatility. He's a tackle. He can play inside if you have to. So there's a lot to like here. And Penn State loves the kid, and now his ranking reflects that.
He will not get to campus until the summer, but he has a head start physically in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
6'6", almost 320 pounds, 6'11" wingspan. He's a guy that in the track and field circuit was an outstanding shot put guy, which is a really, Jaden Williams, as you might recall, a couple cycles ago, was a state champion in the shot put. He was a 5-star offensive lineman. There are correlating traits that you look for there. And the comparison at 247 Sports for him is to Tualisi Fuaga, who was a first-round pick out of Oregon State, an All-American during the 2023 season. He was selected by the New Orleans Saints at number 14 overall last year. So high hopes for them. And I have a story up here on a Friday about Phil Troutwine and that offensive line room. Take you back to 2021. It's before your time, Tyler, but you're coming out of COVID, and they didn't have enough available offensive linemen to have a normally structured blue-white game that April of 2021. That fall, they finished second to last in Big Ten for rushing, and they were outside of the top 90 in sacks allowed. This past fall, they led the Big Ten in rushing. They were top 25 in sacks allowed for the second consecutive season. And we've got Andrew Ivins, our scouting director at 247 Sports, on National Signing Day while he's reviewing some Nittany Lions notes. He says Penn State brings the deepest offensive line in college football into 2025. And it's hard to argue when you realize that, well, they only really lost Sal Wormley, and he played a lot of ball. He started 3 years at left guard, but a lot of guys played a lot of ball. You have 6 guys back who have started at least 6 games. You have really impressive young pieces. I'm going to throw Jaden Williams in that conversation as a redshirt sophomore. You got Chimdi Ono, Alex Birchmeyer were highly regarded recruits in that same redshirt sophomore status. And then Cooper Cousins is the one that everyone's really eyeing up right now as a sophomore. He was able to play about 200 snaps last year as a freshman. And then JB Nelson, a veteran that everybody loves in this program. He's been around a while. He started a bunch of games. How does he factor in? And oh, by the way, TJ Shanahan is now here from Texas A&M. Last year, he started 5 games at guard for the Aggies in the SEC. So just while we're on that subject of Goodman and bringing in another big-time talent, got to show a lot of love to Phil Troutwine, because you talk about the narrative changing here in Happy Valley and nationally. It's been a remarkable process. And it hasn't had to be a reclamation project in that tight end room, despite some different coaches being involved. It's always been a staple of success here at Penn State for several years now. And Andrew Olish, he finishes inside the top 50 in those rankings out of Southern Lehigh in Pennsylvania. Number 46 overall. He's the number 3 tight end. You look across the industry, he got a lot of respect in late rankings, and he's a guy that is going to come to campus, face a really talented room, and I don't necessarily see a clear path toward playing time. He's got some weight to put on, but bringing in 2 top 50 tight ends back-to-back cycles makes you feel really good about the era at this position beyond Tyler Warren, who was as good as we have seen a tight end at the college football level.
Yeah, he might not be as far along physically as Luke Reynolds was at this time last year, but the catch-22 there is Olish is probably more refined as a pass catcher, as a tight end, than Reynolds was at this point last year. Because remember, Reynolds, during his prep career in New England, he played a lot of quarterback up until his senior year. Olish was doing his thing at tight end from the jump. And he also took on a lot of different roles as a tight end for Southern Lehigh this past season. He played in line more, which I think was a concerted effort to get him ready for the next level. But that also created some mismatches for opposing defenses. He was able to hurt opposing defenses playing more as an inline tight end. And then I got the chance to see him in the state playoffs, and he was lining up out wide and he was dominating. You know, he was the focal point of that passing attack. He is a natural receiving tight end. He's got everything you could possibly want as a natural receiving tight end. So does that mean he makes plays in practice and kind of forces his way into the equation, even if there's not a clear path to playing time? I don't think it's the craziest thing. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But for him to get to that point, for us to have that conversation seriously, he is going to have to continue adding muscle to be physically ready and physically at a point where he could deal with the rigors of playing in the Big Ten. So his development is going to be an exciting one to follow, in the sense that you figure he's only going to continue to improve as a pass catcher, and he's already so good at that. But then he's going to come into his own physically as well. So once Chuck Losey gets to work with that and they pack on the muscle and add the good weight, where does he stand physically in addition to where he currently is as a receiver? It's just, for me, that's got to be the biggest reason why there's so much intrigue surrounding Andrew Olish. That's why certain people have him as one of the top tight ends in the country, you know, a borderline 5-star guy. I think he's going to live up to that at the next level.
And a huge win very late in the process, flipping from Michigan. He had other teams like Oregon trying to get him to make that flip. He picks Penn State, comes close to home, and ultimately practicing, as I said, during bowl prep, he's out there. And oh, by the way, 2 more names we have to mention at tight end, because obviously Luke Reynolds deserves a lot of love. But Khalil Dinkins is a redshirt senior. He's been waiting in the wings as the number 2 tight end lately behind Tyler Warren, looking to take his next step forward. And then we have to acknowledge that Andrew Rappleyea is a guy that we are both very high on. Yeah. He spent what would have been his redshirt freshman season dealing with an injury recovery situation. We'll see where he is coming into spring ball, moving into the summer, but he is going to be a presence in that tight end room as well. Tyler, a few more names to get to, one inside the top 100, and that is Darius Dixon, cornerback out of powerhouse Mater Dei in Southern California. We absolutely love this pickup when it happened. I really like it a lot more that they actually got it finalized. When they got it, I said, well, we'll see. We'll see. It's Mater Dei High School. It's Penn State. That's a long way. It's a big bridge to gap. They got it done. And we've got our talent evaluators, Andrew Ivins included, our scouting director at 247 Sports, pointing to him as the instant impact member of this recruiting class. And who am I to argue, considering the way that Terry Smith has utilized freshman cornerbacks over the year, and the fact that they just lost 2 cornerbacks who played a lot of football for them in NFL draft prospect Jalen Kimber and Rutgers transfer Cam Miller.
Yeah, I see it. I see the potential for him to be an early impact guy at Penn State. I think there are a couple different reasons for that. The first of which being in modern day, I mean, you're already playing college level competition really on a daily basis, whether it be in practice or in the CIF. I mean, the talent you go up against on a daily basis is top notch. It's as good as anywhere in the country. I mean, you saw Dixon have a pick 6 against a 5-star USC quarterback signee this past fall in Houston Longstreet. So he's battle tested. There's no doubt about that. We often talk about guys, and we've talked about guys in this cycle as well. Matt Allen, Lyric Samuel. There's going to be an adjustment going from high school ball to Big Ten in terms of level of competition. There's going to be an adjustment for Dixon as well, because a lot of these guys he's going up against now, they're more refined physically, and it's a different kind of beast. But when you come from a program like Mater Dei, and you're seeing the talent you see every game and every day in practice, the transition is a little bit easier. It makes it easier for you to get up to speed. And everything he's been doing since he got to Penn State has checked out physically, getting up to speed in the playbook and the meeting rooms. Everything's checking out. So I could see that. I could definitely see him being an early impact guy for Penn State. Just the usage history of Terry Smith with his young DBs. He's not afraid to burn through those red shirts. If he thinks you can play, and you're going to be on the field. So,
and I know
he's
they
gonna
love the physicality there. Sometimes you get a freshman at cornerback, and I know Penn State, when they are recruiting cornerbacks, it's kind of it's a non-negotiating trait they need to see.
Yeah.
But when you got a guy coming that they're already raving about the physicality, I spoke with former All-American cornerback Alan Zamaitis, who's now Penn State's recruiting coordinator, one of their recruiting coordinators. And he said the physicality stands out and the versatility. They see him as a kind of a chess piece potentially in the defensive backfield, a guy who could line up in different roles. He did that at Mater Dei throughout his career, and he matches that speed, which is important at that position, with that willingness to attack the line of scrimmage, to attack a ball carrier. And so that combination could do wonders for him as he gets the chance to build in the practice field March and April. 4 other players who are outside of the top 100, but inside the top 24/7. I'm going to give them all to you now, Tyler, and I want you to come back to me with who you think is the most intriguing member of that group in 2025 alone. Not long-term, but here for this 2025 team with national championship aspirations. Number 134 overall, number 10 against linebackers. Perhaps you've heard of the name, LeVar Arrington II. You've got Ivan Kamaju, number 178 overall, number 18 among defensive linemen. Matthew Outen, a guy that we've discussed a lot, the receiver out of Virginia, number 196, number 10 overall athlete, as he's labeled at 24/7 Sports. He will play receiver for Penn State. And then lastly, at number 208 overall, you've got Jeff Exner Jr., another addition to that receiver room from the McDonough School down in Maryland, who will get on campus later this year. So there are 4 outside the top 100, solidly inside the top 24/7. Who is the guy that you think has a legitimate chance from that group to make an impact for the Nittany Lions in the months and the year ahead?
Man, this is a tough one.
I know.
It's tough because the majority of those guys, 3 of the 4 really, are still raw in certain areas. Exner is more of a high floor guy, but I think, his skill set, just because you're high floor doesn't mean you're going to be an instant impact guy, right? You still got to come in and do things, and you got to show you belong on the field early. I feel like I still got to go with Matthew Outen just because of the state of the wide receiver room and the need for playmakers. And I've said it, I'll continue to echo it really, that I feel like he's a talent, raw skill set wise, athletically. Penn State hasn't really had in its wide receiver room in a little bit. So if he can get up to speed, and really grow as a natural receiver, going from pure athlete to natural receiver at the next level, I think he's going to have every opportunity to crack that rotation more so than some of the other guys, because Kamaju is walking into a pretty crowded defensive line. And as tantalizing as his upside is, he's still going to have to pack on some weight. He's going to get his start from everything I've heard is he's going to get his start on the edge at the end. And, maybe he slides inside down the road. Regardless, Penn State loves what he's going to bring to the table at some point in his career. And then with Arrington, you have the versatility. You have that raw athleticism where you could play on the edge if you have to. You can play that traditional linebacker position, which Penn State recruited him to play if he has to. So you could plug him in a couple of different places and it would work. Does that mean he's going to be on the field early? I'm not quite sure. I just think with the wide receiver room being in its current state, there's probably more opportunity for a guy at that position than there are others. And I feel like at that point, the logical choice is Outen.
Yeah. I think that I've said so many good things about Outen, and people know where I'm at with this receiver class and him, but I just haven't seen freshman receivers come to this campus and impact things on the field, going back to when Keandre Lambert-Smith and Parker Washington were freshmen back in the COVID season of 2020. If I'm forgetting somebody, I forget, but no one is coming to mind who showed up as a freshman and was ready to really be part of that rotation. We thought maybe Tysier Denmark could get a hold on that. That never happened. And in that receiver room, I think that's pretty telling. I don't love it, but I think I'm going to go with LeVar Arrington because I think he's got work to do physically. I think that's pretty clear after seeing him on the practice field. He's thinner right now at this stage, and I think ultimately if he's going to be a presence on the edge, that's going to have to change. But playing with linebackers right now, where I see maybe he'll have a path is special teams, perhaps. Does he ultimately prove to be enough of a piece of size and quickness? And, at 6'3", where he can do some things for Justin Lustig in special teams coverage and work his way towards defensive roles. I think that's where maybe I lean in his direction a little bit right now. But I'd be really curious. I think it's a good thing that he was able to get to campus in January. Same goes for Matthew Outen. Those two would be the guys I would look at. But again, wide receiver track record lately, not so great. While we've seen defenders maybe not break through at their position group, but they've gotten on the field for special teams work, and it's kind of given them a role in year one on campus. But so 7 guys in the top 24/7, a lot more beyond that you can check out at 247sports.com for that group. But that's the case closed right now in terms of rankings. They'll be evolving for the 2026 cycle. But Tyler, a fun episode. I feel like we covered a lot of ground, a lot of names, refreshed on a few really important storylines within this cycle that we're going to get to later on in the year and in the camp season and all that stuff. But really kind of switching it up from the 2025 class to the 2026 class being the one that at the forefront. And of course, though, that 2025 class, as we just assessed, now they're part of the process. They're part of this championship effort. And Tyler, we appreciate your insight on all of it. And you have a lot more to offer over at Lions247.com.
Yeah, a lot more to come now. This was a lot of fun today. Certain times when you hit that dead period, you think, oh, what are we going to talk about? But recruiting never disappoints in that regard. So, yeah, no, this was a lot of fun.
There's a ton of coverage over at Lions247.com. I encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go check that out. Please subscribe and give us a high rating if you've enjoyed following this podcast. And we'll come back to you with a couple more episodes next week to break down the latest in Penn State football development. For now, on behalf of Tyler Calvaruso and our entire crew at Lions247.com, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions247 Podcast.